Hey, Redeemer family. Thanks for being here to study Mark 16 with me on the Daily Word. Before we jump in, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you click on that little bell so that you don't miss the Daily Word or anything else that we produce here at Redeemer. Now, listen, I did Mark 16, two sermons in this passage back in 2017. We've tried to provide the links in the descriptions to make it easier for you to watch those if you're interested. I'm going to do in about 5-10 minutes what I did over two sermons here. So I've organized today's teachings around two headings. The first one is confidence in the resurrection, verses 1-8. The big idea here is that Jesus is alive. Jesus' resurrection is not fake news. It really happened. It's history. It's not fantasy. Mark demonstrates this by giving human evidence with the women and their lack of expectation for a resurrection, even though in chapters 8, 9, 10, and 12, Jesus said he would die and rise again. They weren't expecting it. That's why they brought the spices. That's why they did the things they did. Also, Mark shows the resurrection is history with divine evidence, namely this 1 to 2 ton stone being rolled away and the angelic announcement that he is risen. So we've got human evidence, we've got divine evidence, all that points to the fact that Jesus truly rose from the dead. All of this comes with the expectation that they would go and tell others the good news that Jesus was alive. Now, question is, did Mark really end in verse 8 with, "For they were afraid"? Well, I think they did. I think he did. The whole book has been about fear and amazement at all that Jesus did and all that he is. And if it seems strange to you that Mark ended this way, you're not the only one who thought that was strange. Early Christians didn't like it either, so they added multiple endings, one of which we have, many of which actually we have here at the end of Mark. And so we'll call this next section Confidence in the Bible. Big idea being the Bible is God's word. So I'm convinced after studying it out that Mark 16 verses 9-20 should not be in the Bible, that Mark ended his gospel with verse 8. Now, good people disagree on this, but this is my conclusion. Over 99% of your New Testament can be trusted to say exactly what the original authors wrote. And this, unfortunately, is not one of those parts. This is one of the less than 1% of the New Testament where things were added into the text that shouldn't be there. So God revealed truth. So how did this all happen? How did we get the Bible? Well, God revealed truth to the New Testament authors who wrote exactly what he wanted written. These writings are inspired, meaning when the Bible speaks, God speaks, because the Bible comes from God himself as the ultimate author. So just like Jesus is human and divine, so the Bible is the product of human authors and the divine author. From there, we have thousands of copies. God's people recognized that these writings were special, and so they copied these writings. God's people saw the writings that became the New Testament. They saw them as inspired. They saw them as from God, and because they loved God's word, they made copies. Now, to date, we have over 6,000 manuscripts of the New Testament. And a manuscript ranges from a fragment of a single verse to whole chapters to even whole books. The whole New Testament itself could be called a manuscript. With thousands of copies, we have thousands of different readings. Now, listen, most of the different readings are minor differences than what was originally written, and those minor differences are obvious. When these differences aren't obvious or meaningless, the translators of the ESV, they put these differences in the margin, or they put brackets around them in the text, so we're not trying to hide them. They're there for you to look at. Now, how much of the New Testament is like this? Like I said, less than 1% of your New Testament. This means God has preserved his word. Even the less than 1% that we have, that where there are differences, we still have the original. It's just hard to tell because the differences make so much sense. It's hard to tell which the original is, but we still have the original. God has preserved his word. So if you use the King James Version, you see that it's not in brackets. And that's because King James translators used much newer manuscripts than the modern translations do. So modern translations are based on older manuscripts that are closer to the time of the original authors, versus the King James and the New King James use manuscripts that are farther away, but there are more of them. So there's a tension to this day as to which ones are best to use. Now, why do most scholars reject Mark 19 verses 9 to 20 as not what Mark originally wrote? I'm going to give you 5 reasons. First, it's not found in the best copies of the New Testament. Second, it's not found in the early translations of the New Testament into other languages. Third, some of the earliest church fathers don't seem to know of the ending, although some early church fathers do know of the ending, suggesting that the addition was made very early. 4, there are 4 alternate endings that to the book of Mark, which only makes sense if this text is not original. 6, if verses 9 to 20 are original, it doesn't make sense that it's not in the very best manuscripts that we have. And I'm going to add a 6th reason right now. Number 6, what's taught in verses 9 to 20 don't match other parts in the New Testament. For instance, Jesus being in another form in verse 12, that's more Gnostic than Christian. Salvation by baptism in verse 16 seems to be taught. And then in verse 18, the ability of believers to pick up poisonous snakes and to drink poison. You're not going to find that commanded in other parts of the New Testament. So where does this come from? This addition, verses 9 to 20? Well, probably somewhere between 50 and 100 years after Mark wrote. People were not happy with his abrupt ending, so they added what they thought would be a more proper ending. They took parts from other New Testament verses, patched them together to give us what we have in verses 9 to 20. Now, why end like Mark did in verse 8 again? Because Mark's focus in the whole book, starting in chapter 3, verse 6, really, is on the death of Jesus. That's his focus. So his book is all about Jesus, the Son of God, who died for sin. So he rightly ends on the note of amazement and fear that this one who died is risen again, which, by the way, amazement and fear was people's reaction to Jesus throughout the whole book of Mark. Well, I hope that was helpful. We'll see you another time. We'll see you next time. We'll see you tomorrow for another Daily Word.